and welcome to the Giraffe Social Media Podcast. It's what social media managers are talking about. I'm Chloe Belchamber, and on today's episode, I'm direct messaging GOAT's campaign director, Hannah Ryan. We're going to be talking about how coronavirus has had an impact on the influencer marketing landscape, how you can harness the power of influencers to create a successful online campaign, and of course, the do's and don'ts that come along with it. Hi Hannah, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hello, no problem. It's really exciting.
Where are you joining us from today? Are you working from home at the moment?
Yep, I'm working at home. So I'm based in London and I've been working at home for, I think, the past year now. It feels much more normal, but it is still a bit strange.
I know. How crazy that we're coming up to a year of lockdown almost. It's insane.
I know. It is crazy.
Before we kick things off, we like to start all of our direct message episodes with a round of quick fire questions. So just clear your mind and answer whatever comes into your head first. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right, let's go. Disney or Pixar?
Disney.
Snapchat or Instagram stories?
Instagram stories.
Dine out or order in?
Oh, I think dine out.
Nicki Minaj or Cardi B?
Nicki Minaj.
The OG. Give up social media or give up Netflix?
Oh, give up Netflix.
Work from home or work in the office?
Can I say by a mixture?
Of course, I'm with you. I love a bit of both. Escape to the beach or escape to the country?
Oh, to the beach.
Follow foodies or follow fashion?
I think foodies.
Work hard or play hard?
Work hard, of course.
Good answer. And finally, bungee jumping or skydiving?
Oh, I think bungee jumping because I've actually done skydiving.
Have you? Where did you go skydiving?
I did it in Australia, actually.
Oh, wow. I'm very familiar with Australia, if you couldn't tell.
Yeah, I was going to say, are you from Australia?
That's me, yes. How exciting. That's so cool. I think
it
would
cool.
love to stay away from both, but if I had to pick, maybe I'd go skydiving. I don't know.
Yeah, I think it feels like you've got more control when you're skydiving, but
strangely,
when you see, the bungee jumping one, I think is it in New Zealand where you're holding on to your feet, I think, and you dive down.
Yeah,
not sure.
I don't like the sound of that at all. Cool. So to get us started, can you tell us a little bit about GOAT and what you guys do over there?
Sure. So GOAT is an influencer marketing agency. We're an influencer first agency. So everything that we do is influencer first. We've been around for, I think, around 4 to 5 years now. And I've been working at GOAT for 3 years, just over 3 years. So when I first started, there were about 25 to 30 people working in the agency, and now we've got over 100 across different places. So we used to have offices in London, New York, and Singapore. We're now currently working remotely, as I'm sure a lot of people are. But yeah, we basically work with a huge range of different brands, and we talk to them about how we can help run a marketing campaign using influencers at the forefront of the creative idea. So yeah, that's a little summary, I guess.
That's super cool. I love the idea of putting influencers first. That's really cool. And so you're obviously a campaign director over there. What does an average day look like in your role?
So there's quite a few different things. I think the fun thing about my job is that not every day is the same. So there's always different things to be working on. But my typical day is normally catching up with my team. So I've got a team of 5 who I work with on a day-to-day basis. We'll catch up on all of the campaigns that we're running, all of the campaigns that we're prepping, and those that are live. And then throughout the day, we'll probably be talking to clients about how the campaign's working. I'll sometimes be jumping on pitches to talk about new business with potential clients, and then also working on lots of reporting. So that's one of the really important parts of the job, is the data side. So really looking at what the campaign is driving and how we're proving success for the client that we're working with.
Awesome. And you actually studied geography at university. I had a little stalk of your LinkedIn profile. How does someone go from studying geography to becoming a campaign director at an influencer marketing agency?
It's funny you ask that, because I think everyone I speak to, if they ask me about university, I'm like, yeah, I did geography, but now this is my job. But I think really, when I was at university, I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I studied geography because I liked it and I think I was good at it. So when I left uni, I was just applying for lots of different internships just to get some experience, because I think that's the hardest part about kind of getting your foot into the door. So I started at Goat as an intern. I was working 3 days a week. So that was in 2017 or end of 2016. And then I got the job after 3 months. And because the company was so small, it was evolving and changing so quickly. And I think obviously I was lucky to start at that time, because I have been able to grow with the business and to see all of the amazing things that we've done over the last few years. But that's kind of how I ended up here. I worked my way through. I had a team, and then the structure of the whole team changed slightly, and then I was promoted to campaign director. So yeah, it's amazing. Like when I look back, it's kind of crazy how it's changed so much in the last 3 years, but it's also really exciting that I've seen it from the start to the finish. Well, not the finish, it's still going. But yeah, I've seen it from the very start, which is really fun.
Wow, that sounds super cool. I love that kind of journey up the ranks. What do you love most about working in the influencer space then?
So I think the best thing is that there's always new and different types of creators out there. So I think the most interesting thing is that when you're looking for influencers for a particular campaign, and kind of doing research about the space, like whether it's the parenting space, the fashion space, the foodie space, there's always new creators popping up that you don't know or you've never seen. So I think in my job, people will expect me to know every influencer that's out there, but of course I don't. And I think that's one of the most exciting things. I think as well, how brands can like adapt and listen to us and take on our advice. That's a really fun part for me, because I guess we're the experts in the space. And so when we're speaking to brands about how we can use influencers, it might be something that's quite new for them. But it's really fun and exciting and uplifting when they take on our word and they trust us, and then we see the really good results. So I think both of those things.
Yeah, totally. And going on from that, I guess talk us through the strategic and creative process for an influencer campaign.
Sure. So I think the first thing is to think about the objective. So what does the brand actually want to achieve through running activity with influencers? And I think the important part there is not to have too many objectives. We should just have one key thing that we're working towards. And then what we'll do is we'll think about lots of different creative ideas. We'll pitch different routes that we can go down. And the strategy team at Goat will put together those really fun and exciting ideas. That's not my forte, but that's something that they're really amazing at, kind of picking apart what the brand is trying to say and then how we can portray it in a really fun and new way. And then we'll think about the platforms that we might use. So who's the audience that you're trying to reach, and therefore what platform should you be using on social? And then we will hopefully get some really great content out. We'll look at the reporting side of things. We'll look at what the activity is actually driving and then optimize to change things or carry on with certain things that are working really well. And then we'll do a final report. So look at all of the sentiment that we've driven, look at all of the engagement, look at the sales potentially that we might have driven. But I guess there's a lot of things out there that says now it's not just about the likes and the comments on an image, it's deeper than that. So that's kind of the process that we run through. It's a bit more detailed than that, but it would take quite a while to explain all of it.
No, that was a great overview. And I think that's what I love most about influencer marketing, is that it really is for everyone. Like, no matter what industry you're in, there is an influencer that you can work with to get your messaging out there.
Definitely.
So the biggest thing to come out of the past year is, of course, coronavirus, and that is happening all over the world. Do you think that the influencer landscape and the roles of influencers has changed now because of this?
So this is a really interesting one, because when we first went into lockdown back in March, we were speaking to brands about how influencers are still there, they're still creating content, and how can we kind of utilize that and see a positive from it. And I think a lot of people were spending more time on social, so that it meant that viewing influencer content was almost like a bit of an escape from the world that we'd been like thrown into. More people were consuming the content that they liked, maybe finding new content that they hadn't been viewing before. So I think the role of influencers suddenly changed within moments, because we could see that, okay, people are online now looking for ways to spend their time, looking for inspiration, maybe because our routine's been thrown out the window. Like, how can we do something different? And influencers were there to showcase that, and brands could take that opportunity to work with them and really find the positive. But I think the role of influencers, I feel like they've become a lot more respected. I was thinking about this last night, because I think even creators themselves, I mean, some people call them creators, some people call them influencers. I even see influencers on Instagram, for example, talking about how they don't like to be called an influencer, or they find it cringy that they're called an influencer. When actually, I think now they've become way more respected, and they should be proud that they are working with these brands and they're creating success for the brands that they're working for. But I think another thing that's come out of lockdown and coronavirus is that influencer content is being used in different ways. So I don't know if you saw at the start of lockdown, Chloe, where they started on TV, there were lots of adverts of people at home with kind of like a Zoom background.
Yes.
Yeah, and it's because brands couldn't go into the studio like they usually would and film a commercial. So I actually did some work with Tesco, who's one of my main clients, and we used influencer content on a Food Love Stories campaign on social, but then we also provided that content to be used on TV within the advert. So I think the role of influencers has started to change in that way, because brands can see that, okay, we don't need to script something and make it very rigid and perfect. It can actually have more of that creative element and real life feel, especially when we were in lockdown. Everyone is in the same boat, right? And so it's really interesting to see how content that's created for social can actually then be used on different channels. And I think brands will continue to do that a lot more as we move into 2021.
Yeah, it's super interesting, isn't it? I think like when lockdown first hit, and then obviously with TikTok as well, we're seeing a lot more kind of authentic, unscripted content. So I think that kind of worked in their favor, and more down to earth thing people were responding better to. So that's super interesting that you brought it up.
Yeah, definitely.
I guess going off that, we know that influencer marketing is one of the biggest players in the game right now. According to Media Kicks, the global value of influencer marketing last year was between $5 and $10 billion, which is insane. But I guess, do you think now is a great time to be advertising? I mean, we saw the backlash influencers in Dubai received recently. is partnering with brands and posting these kind of really almost aspirational, unattainable content, is it appropriate right now? Like, I know we're coming to the end of lockdown, but maybe a few months ago it wasn't the kind of thing that people were too interested in seeing.
Yeah, no, this is a really interesting one because a lot of people have been talking about the Dubai thing, all of the influencers in Dubai. And I was thinking about it. It's kind of, I feel like influencers get grouped together. So if one influencer does one thing wrong, or if they're seen to be doing something that an audience doesn't like, all influencers are suddenly bad and negative, you know? Whereas if a celebrity was to do something wrong, not all celebrities are grouped together. So I guess that's my kind of take on it at the moment. But I do completely understand what you're saying. I think what's really important now is to be able to resonate in the right way with the audience that you're trying to reach. So when you're putting out a message, really think about how sensitive you need to be. So you're not going to talk about, going and celebrating Easter with all of your family, because we don't know if we can do that. So it's about being real and sticking to the times, not just working to try and push a message that you think people will like. It's actually about what will they actually respond well to. You really need to think about how they would comment on something. Would someone like an image if you were wearing a bikini on the beach, which I totally understand. Everyone that's in Dubai posting images, I'm jealous, to be honest. I want to be on the beach. But yeah, I think it's interesting to think about how influencers aren't just one person. There's lots of different influencers and creative people out there. But I totally understand that brands shouldn't be pushing any messages that could cause like negativity, or a feeling of like, you might not respect a brand if they start talking about something that isn't really likely to happen right now or isn't realistic in the current climate. So I think it's really important to be relevant, and to kind of judge your audience before you put something on social.
Definitely. I think it's been really make or break for brands recently, like through this period with the messaging that they're putting out. Like, it can quite literally destroy brands if they say the wrong thing during this time. But
for sure.
Yeah, I guess with all that messaging in mind, what are some of your top tips for communicating a brand's message through influencers?
Sure. I think, as I just said before, it's about thinking about who your audience are. So what demographic are you trying to reach, and what platforms are they most likely to be using? And then that's where you can start. That's your starting point. I think one of my tips, and of course I would say this because I work in influence marketing, but I think it's about taking risks and not just being safe and playing the safe card, because a lot of brands that we work with, we could run a very simple campaign that maybe doesn't drive that much success or that many sales in the long run, for example. But if you take a risk and you really go above and beyond to try out new things, try out new platforms, try out different styles of content, I think that's when you can really learn what works for your brand and how you can continue kind of inputting that into your wider marketing strategy. But yeah, I think it's really important to have that element of creative freedom for an influencer. So like I said earlier about the TV adverts, for example, I think a brand should always understand that they can't script a campaign, and they shouldn't have every piece of content looking exactly the same. They want to be able to give influencers that element of creativity to interpret the brief for themselves and then go away and create that content for the brand. So I think, take risks, but also put trust in the influencers that you're working with, because they will be able to create some amazing content that will not only work for your brand, but also will resonate with the audience that you're trying to reach.
Yeah, I love that. That's great advice. And I guess you touched on some there, but is there anything brands should really try and avoid?
think one thing they should avoid is to be quite picky with their brief. So don't make your brief too rigid. Make sure that you're thinking about how it can be interpreted in different ways. And also, I guess it's less about what they should avoid, but a suggestion is to be always be really inclusive with your campaign. So we always see on social now that it's so important to make sure that we have influencers from lots of different backgrounds. So we always need to be inclusive and always have that element of diversity. We need to look at people from the LGBTQ plus community. We need mums, we need dads, we need everyone. And it's really important. I think that's something we really pride ourselves on. And we know that for a brand, it's really easy to just forget and just to think, okay, this person's perfect. But it's so important to think about the wider picture.
Absolutely.
So yeah.
That's great. And I'm sure you have seen so many influencer marketing campaigns done super well in your role. And I always love to ask anyone who works in the influencer space, what do you think is the best way to advertise right now? What are the platforms that we should be on? What are the messages we should be using? That kind of thing.
Sure. So I guess this ties into a lot of the things we've said in the previous questions, but I think it is about finding who's your audience, who are you trying to target, and what platform are they using, because there's no point in putting something out on Facebook, for example, if you're trying to target an audience that are between 18 to 25, because those people are most likely to be on TikTok or Instagram. And so once you've kind of pinpointed the audience, that's when you can think about the platform. But I think TikTok at the moment obviously is huge, and it has been for a while, but I think brands are sometimes nervous to use it because it's a newer platform. We don't know exactly all of the stats that we can see from it. We don't know actually how many people it's reaching. So I think it's that thing about taking a risk as well. So what's the best way to advertise? Obviously through influencers, but also to take risks with the platforms. You could spend a small amount of budget on a new platform to see if it works, and then continue if it does. So yeah, I don't think there's one best way, but it's definitely a combination of things that we've discussed.
Yeah, all about trial and error, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Now, I read a statistic on the GOAT website that said that 80% of influencers don't work. How do you find the ones that do?
Interesting. Yeah, so I think the ones that... Do you mean how do we find them? How do we know that they're going to work?
Yeah, I guess so. How do you know what kind of influencers are going to work for you? What are the things to look out for?
Okay, fine. So I think the things to look out for are, does that influencer actually relate to or like the brand that they're talking about? So you want them to, when they're talking about the campaign message or trying to make a sale, for example, swipe up to buy this product, would they actually buy the product themselves, or are they just being paid to talk about the product? So I think there's a fine line between someone that's just being paid to post about a campaign and then someone that's really invested in the campaign and likes the product themselves, knows exactly what they're talking about, has used the product for themselves in the past. So I think, like you said, Chloe, it's all about trial and error. We'll never know by using someone once if they will work. It's about collecting all of the data that we've been collecting over the years, and looking at which type of influencer works for a certain product. So are we looking at a product that's really expensive? And if so, does that influencer's audience have disposable income to spend on that particular product? And if not, is it right to be pushing that product to that audience? So I think there's lots of different things that you have to take into account, and like you said, 80% of influencers won't work. They won't drive that sale, but the 20% of people that do will make a huge impact. And I think that kind of leads me on to something I was going to say in this podcast was, I don't know if you saw on Friday, BBC News did an article about Olivia Bowen from Love Island. And she had basically posted, she's doing a renovation of her home, and she'd posted a image and not tagged a brand because she wasn't working with them. But everyone started saying, what's that item? I really want to buy it. And the guy that owned the business, I've written it down, it was called Still and Bloom. He contacted her and just said, oh, it's amazing that you've bought my homeware item. And she then created an Instagram story, I think, and spoke about the product, spoke about the brand, and their following size increased within hours there. And he said his phone was like going off for 2 days with people asking about his homeware items. So I think that's just a small scale of how you can see influencers really driving that kind of effect. But if we do that on a larger scale, that's when we can make some really good success for the client.
Wow, that's super cool. I hadn't read that, but that's so awesome.
Yeah, I think it's called The Influencer Effect, BBC News.
Okay, I will have to search that after this. Now, you kind of touched on earlier that measuring the success of a campaign isn't always about like the number of likes or comments that an influencer gets on said post. So can you talk us through the difference between vanity metrics and actual performance data?
Sure. So I guess vanity metrics, so you're looking at likes and comments. This doesn't necessarily mean that someone is likes your brand or if they're talking about your brand, because a lot of the time you'll look at comments on an ad, on an Instagram post, for example, and they might be talking about the person's top that they're wearing, or, oh, I love your makeup, where's your foundation from? When actually they're not talking about that for the ad. That's not the focus. So vanity metrics, so likes and comments, aren't always going to be how we can measure that. But when we're looking at performance data, it's all about things like engagement rate, post reach. We're looking at the amount of impressions that someone is generating. We're looking at the amount of clicks, excuse me. And we're also looking at, for example, if we're looking at a campaign where we want to drive subscriptions, we're then looking at the CPA, so cost per acquisition. So it's really about what are you paying that influencer and what are they then generating, and therefore how much are you paying per a million impressions, per sale, so, or per click. And that's really what we want to look at. It's not just about, wow, they've got 1,000 likes, because that doesn't mean anything. There's always a value that should be attached to that particular metric. So I think that's, when I speak to my parents about influencers, they're like, oh, what's that? Like, oh, do they get loads of likes on their pictures? And it's funny because maybe my parents' generation don't completely understand how actually influencers can drive that value. And that's when we look deeper and we look at, okay, what are we paying them in relation to what they're driving? So I think that's when we really delve deeper into the performance data that we find.
Yeah, I guess that's probably why micro influencers are having such a moment right now, because while they don't garner the same kind of vanity metrics that larger influencers do, they have such a strong community. Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned that, because I think there's a huge difference between using a macro influencer versus a micro influencer, and it really just depends on what you're trying to achieve. So if the brand wants huge reach, of course you're going to use someone that's got over 1 million followers, because they're going to reach millions of people. But if you want someone that might tap into a really niche audience, you'll use a micro influencer, because you know that 80% of their followers are from the audience that you want to target. So yeah,
I guess that's another discussion, but micro and macro influencers, there's huge differences.
Absolutely. Now, you are, of course, a campaign director over at Goat. So I have to know, are there any exciting projects that you and the team are currently working on?
Yeah, so actually I was working on something that's just finished, but it was really exciting. We were working with Tesco on a campaign that's called Little Helps. And basically, I don't know if you shop at Tesco, Chloe, but
I do.
you can base every time you buy a bag for life, that money goes towards a project called Bags of Help. And basically, it funds lots of different community projects across the UK. And we actually worked with Purple Goat, who are our sister agency, and they work with lots of disabled influencers. And it's the first time we've really worked on kind of a reputation brief where we want to push a message and inform audiences about all of the good things that are happening for the community and for disabled influencers, for disabled people that go to the shop and need to get around in the same way that anyone else would. And they have something called Changing Places, and it's facilities within the shopping centre or in Tesco where they can go into the toilet, and there's a facility for them if they need to move out of their wheelchair, exactly how they would be able to do at home. And so that was a really exciting project for us because we hadn't done anything with disabled influencers before, or anything to talk about the disabled community. And so I thought that was really interesting, and it felt really positive to be talking about those kind of things. So that was a really exciting one for us.
Oh, that sounds awesome. And out of all the content campaigns you've worked on, which has been your favourite and why?
So my colleagues will probably laugh at me for this, but when I first started at Goat, I worked on a campaign for Formula E. I don't know if you've heard of it. But it's basically electric car racing. So it's like Formula One, but it's electric cars. Okay. So it's called Formula E. And, you know, when they first put me on the campaign, I thought, I know nothing about cars. I'm the wrong person for this. But it was so interesting. We got to travel around different places. I went to New York, I went to Paris, I went to Rome, and we took influencers to the different races. I got to go to the races, which was so cool. I didn't think I would enjoy it. But we got to walk around, create content, and kind of talk to the audience about why they should be coming to Formula E, because not many people knew about it, and I didn't either. But it was so fun. It was a really cool one to start my career off with. And we've done some amazing stuff since then. But I think that one will always be something I remember.
I think that's one of the best things about working at an agency is that you get to work with like such diverse clients, people that you would know nothing about otherwise. So I love
that. Yeah, it was really cool.
Influencer marketing can be daunting for a lot of brands. Do you have any advice on how to execute a strong campaign?
That's an interesting one. I think it can definitely be daunting because, especially if a brand hasn't used influencers before, they do take that risk, right? Because they're spending quite a significant amount of money on activity that they don't know much about. Mm-hmm. So I think in order to kind of take that step, it's really about being able to work with your agency or work with the influencers really closely to make sure that they understand your brand as if they worked for your brand. I think that's a really important part. I think before we ever start a campaign, we want to delve really deep into the brand's values, the history of the brand, like who are they trying to talk to, what activity have they done in the past, if any, and how can we replicate that or make it better. So I think definitely it's daunting, but it's about taking that risk, because if it works, then it will be amazing in the future.
Yeah. And I guess we've touched a lot on like sort of how to execute a campaign, but I guess the first step is finding an influencer, right? So what's the best way to find an influencer who shares your niche?
So I think it's about looking at what that where that influencer would be. So where are they based? What places do they go to? So it's quite interesting if you're looking at a particular brand and thinking about your audience, what would that audience be doing? And therefore, what would that influencer be doing? So kind of searching different locations on Instagram, looking for people that might be spending time in different places, looking at different hashtags, looking at different content that's performed really well on different platforms, and seeing what creators have created that content. And also, it's really interesting to look at what other brands are doing. I think it's important that you don't copy what another brand is doing, but it's really important to kind of get inspiration and see what's working well for other brands, and then what could work well for you potentially.
Definitely. Now, my final question for you today, Hannah, is do you see the world of influencer marketing evolving any more throughout 2021?
So I think definitely. I think because we've seen such a shift in the past year, I think although coronavirus has been a terrible situation for everyone, I think influencers and the influencer marketing space has definitely evolved because of it. And I think we'll continue to see that shift in brands spending more budget on influencers, and kind of bringing them forward into the planning of their marketing campaign and their overall strategy. I think it was Estee Lauder in 2019, so before the pandemic, they were spending, I think, 75% of their marketing budget on influencers. It was 75 to 80%, I think. And so that's before the pandemic. So wow. if we saw brands doing the same thing now and into the future, I think there's going to be a huge shift in how influencers are seen and how their platforms are like utilized for different campaigns. So definitely, I think we'll continue to see that shift. We'll continue to see content from influencers being used in different channels. And we'll continue to see brands taking more risks, I hope. And yeah, just getting really creative with how they spend their budgets on marketing.
Well, that all sounds super exciting. I can't wait to watch it all grow and evolve over the next year.
I know, really exciting.
Well, that is all we've got time for today. Thank you so much for joining me, Hannah. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss our next episodes. You can also connect with us on all major social channels and let us know what you thought about today's episode. Have you noticed a change in influencer marketing since coronavirus? Let us know. We've been Giraffe Social Media. You've been amazing. We'll see you next time.